Hello everybody, welcome back to Forza Horizon 5 with a bit of a challenge revolving around the new Rimac Nevera. With an asterisk, because it's basically the Concept 2, but slightly different. There's very minute details that are different between them, but we're going to be using the Nevera in this case. Specifically, it is the full production model of the Concept 2, and it's a beast. All-wheel drive, all-electric hypercar, nearly 1,900 horsepower. It will demolish pretty much everything in a drag race. It's an unbelievably fast car, I believe. It has the production car quarter mile if you exclude prep surfaces like Dodge doesn't do. I don't know, it's very quick. And that got me thinking, what would it take to beat it on a speed zone? And since the new Rally Adventure map is phenomenal and has some truly great roads, including this speed zone road that you're going to be seeing in just a little bit, I wanted to use the new Rally Adventure map for our trial. Originally, I was going to use a budget-based series because the Rimac is incredibly expensive. What car can beat it for less money? But then I remembered that the Hot Wheels expansion added the Sierra Alpha Hill Climb car into the game for 70,000 credits. And it's almost the top of S2 class. It's 986 for 70,000 credits, and it beat it first try. So clearly that was not going to work as an effective thing, because the Sierra would just win every challenge short of drag racing. Actually, no, it won the drag racing challenge too. But with that in mind, I decided to go with PI. What is the lowest PI it would take to beat the Nevera? And the Nevera had a pretty tough benchmark, a 97.6. It lacked some grip, especially in the high-speed corners. The weight definitely dragged it out wide. The lack of crazy aerodynamic parts also hurting it. But also, 1,900 horsepower on any acceleration zone is really helpful for getting a high-speed zone target. Really helpful. And that means it was going to be a pretty tough target to beat. Yeah, we have a lot of PI to play with. It's 968 is the Nevera. But that still means that we're going to have to go faster than a mid-S2 class car. And that's no easy feat. Now, just to make sure that I was being reasonable here, not setting myself an impossible target, I decided to make sure that the time could be beaten. And I chose the Brown BT62 because it's one of the best handling cars in the game, and it's just so grippy and so powerful. It's a rocket ship. It may not have the same pure speed as some of the Forza Edition cars, but rear-wheel drive, non-Forza Edition, it's tough to beat. I mean, the corner speed is incredible. 130 miles an hour to that, I don't know, triple apex corner, however you want to call it. Ludicrous speed. Absolutely superb to drive, and yeah, 102 miles an hour is definitely a new personal best. Shattered the Concept 2's run. So, I knew that the Concept 2 could be beaten. The Brown is a bit high in the PI scale, 974. So we don't have to beat that time. We don't have to beat 102. Our target is still 97.6 miles an hour. But we have to go less than 968 PI. Now, I decided to fight fire with fire. Only one is significantly hotter than the other. The Hennessy Venom F5 is our most powerful vehicle, barring the Rimac. 1,800 horsepower, but the only difference is that one, this has a V8 engine, and two, it's rear-wheel drive. So it's a complete maniac. I am being very careful here on the throttle, which means I did nearly hit the rocks, but we made it stick, and you just see the complete lack of confidence I have in the rear end of this vehicle. I'm being really careful with this throttle. The fact that I'm not really getting wheel spin is a miracle. Once I do get the power down, it's absolutely flying. 167 miles an hour across the line is absolutely brutal, given the start we had at the hairpin, the difficulty in delivering the power. But it wasn't enough. It is simply too difficult to control, too ferocious. in its power delivery. That means you can't actually put the power down when you want to, which means we're 1.1 miles an hour slower through the speed zone than the Rimac, which means that even though this is 964 PI, we're going to have to go a bit lower to go a bit faster. And what I meant by that was going to the Bugatti Divo. It is lower. Instead of 964, we are now down to 958. But it is all-wheel drive. It may only have 1,500 horsepower, but that all-wheel drive and the surprisingly fantastic handling of the Divo makes it a force to be reckoned with. Look at the speed being carried through that corner. This is like 4,200 pounds or some crazy number. That is insanely good corner speed for such a heavy car. It's heavier than the Rimac. It's at least as heavy as the Rimac. And it handles so much better, and it obliterates it. No, it can't hold a candle to the Brabham, but only being 2 miles an hour off and being 3 miles an hour faster than the Rimac is an incredible feat given how heavy this car is. It does not feel it. And then 1,500 all-wheel drive horsepower will get you across the line in a very, very rapid manner. So we go down yet another rung to 952 PI with the Ferrari 599XX Evolution. Naturally aspirated V12 up front, 740 horsepower, rear-wheel drive track racing car that can't actually race in any series and isn't road legal. Now, I should clarify that there are vehicles that are from the festival playlist, because otherwise this would be a really boring video, and I wanted to spruce things up with some interesting cars. Plus, the Nevera was from the festival playlist, so we're not going based off auto show rules on this one, because again, I want it to be more interesting. Anyway, the Ferrari is another great handling vehicle. I was expecting it to beat the Rimac, and it did. It did. It was the last car to break the 100-mile-an-hour barrier. Barely, but it did break an average speed of 100 miles an hour. And no real complaints. Rear-wheel drive was not an issue because of the slick tires and the hilariously weird rear wing on the end. And it did its job perfectly. Now we're starting to get a little bit lower. Starting to get to the point where maybe these cars might not be able to beat the Nevera. But this is a pretty good shot for a more normal road car if you count a McLaren Senna as normal. But it is designed to be the ultimate road legal track car. No expense was spared, no detail is left untouched, and the active aero is comically large, even more comically large than the Bugatti, which is saying something. This has significantly less power. I think it's, 800 horsepower, around there? And it has rear-wheel drive road tires, so it should struggle, and yet it is just good enough handling to edge out the Nevera. We didn't say it had to beat it by much, we just said it had to beat it. And the Senna beat the Nevera by 0.17 miles an hour. It's very close, but the Senna did it. Even with half the horsepower, even with half of the wheels being driven, it was good enough handling that it was able to just squeak a victory, which means we are now into low S2 class for vehicles that can actually beat the Nevera. Now this was a vehicle that I was expecting to beat the Nevera. The Mosler MT900 GT3. It's a full-on GT3 car, so it's got a great chassis, great aerodynamics, great suspension, great brakes, and racing slicks. So it's got all the handling you could ever want. The only concern is 530 horsepower too little? Because that is not a lot of horsepower. The reason this is only 910 on the PI scale is because it has no straight line speed whatsoever, and the acceleration suffers a lot as well with such little power to play with. But again, it has that buffer. It is so good in the corners that even with 530 horsepower, which is nothing in this competition, it is able to carry so much speed that the average is not ruined by the hairpin acceleration zone. And that means the Mosler does beat the Nevera by a relatively comfortable margin, 98.28 miles an hour. It is less than a mile an hour faster, but again, like the Senna, we don't have a number it has to beat. It just has to beat 97.6. It could be 97.61 for all we care. It just has to beat the Nevera, and thanks to the sheer grip achieved in the first half, the second half is offset, and the Mosler is added to the list. We now move on to the lowest S2 class car of the day, the Hoonigan Ford RS200 at just 904 PI. So we are now 64 PI points lower than the Nevera, and this is a bit terrifying. It's kind of like a more controllable version of the Venom F5 because it has rally tires on it, but it has 800 horsepower in a very light, very small car, and that can make it, despite being all-wheel drive, very prone to oversteer and twitchiness. So it was very difficult to get around here, very difficult to get used to the speed going through these corners. So you're supposed to carry as much corner speed as possible, but that just makes the car want to twitch about. That being said, once you do get the hang of the handling, 800 horsepower through all four wheels in a sub 2,800 pound car is a recipe for brutal acceleration. And while it does not have the same handling as the Senna or the Mosler, it has more acceleration, a lot more than the Mosler, for example. And that means it's good enough through the corners I can just about control it using some sneaky lines at the beginning to out-drag them and just beat the Nevera. 98.4 miles an hour is what the Hoonigan did. And that, I thought, was going to be the absolute lowest PI car that stood a reasonable chance. It was already starting to get to the point of, whoa, I didn't know that was possible. But then I saw this. The Mach-E 1400. It's all electric. It's all-wheel drive. It's a racing car. It's got 1,400 horsepower and a crazy aero kit. In my mind, this was pretty much perfect for this challenge. Top of S1 class. I mean, yeah, it's a drift car in spirit. It doesn't really handle like a drift car unless you put it in rear-wheel drive. But it is technically a drift car, so there is that trepidation. But I thought this was going to absolutely monster it because it's a race car with lots of aero. Unfortunately, it just doesn't have the acceleration. It's fast accelerating, especially once you get into the 130s. But it just doesn't have the acceleration, and that means not only is it slower than a Nevera, it's just slow. By a lot. I mean, 93.5 is, to be perfectly frank, pathetic. I mean, what is that, Ford? 1,400 horsepower, almost as powerful as the Chiron, with even more aero, and even grippier tires, in theory, they're slicks. And nothing. It's just slow. I don't understand it. It did not do as well as I thought. And it actually made me dismiss the next vehicle on the list originally. But then I gave it a second chance. Because it was another drifting vehicle, this time the Hoonigan Hoonie Truck. And it has all-wheel drive, drifting race tires, however you want to call them, and 914 horsepower in a custom-built racing vehicle. But the Mach-E didn't do very well, so why would this do very well? Honestly, I didn't think it would. I kind of dismissed it. But then, my last vehicle of the day, I figured, you know what, why not give it a shot? And on its first run, its first completed run, I sort of fell off the cliff one time, but on its first completed run, the Hoonie Truck did a 97.1 mile an hour average. It was only 0.4 of a second off on its first run. And then I got a bit mental because I wanted more. As soon as I saw that on the first run, I thought, well, damn, if I just push this a little harder, this can have some serious speed. And then I just kept pushing. And pushing, then 10 minutes passed, and then 20 minutes passed, and I spent a little too much time. Time wasn't really a constraint on these runs because the vehicles were being driven as hard as they were. But, I sort of really overdid it with the Huna truck. Yeah. Kind of overblew it. However, the results spoke for themselves because despite being on, well, essentially a drifting vehicle, drift tires, drift suspension, and with my knowledge of the Mach-E behind me, the Huna truck somehow did a 98.02 mile an hour run. Not only did it beat the Nevera, it beat the Senna. This is S1 class 896. And it beat the 968 PI Nevera, which had almost 1,000 more horsepower. That is honestly incredible. It was the biggest surprise of the entire day, and I absolutely love that I spent the time getting that Huna truck because, oh, it was so rewarding once it was done, and the fact it did it for less than S1 900, icing on the cake. Could any other S1 class cars beat the Nevera's target? Well, I figured the Vol 05RR was a pretty good shout. It's very underpowered, less than 400 horsepower, but it's incredibly light, and it's sort of like a closed-wheel Ariel Atom in that track car sense. And yeah, it's brilliant to drive. However, unlike the Moser, which has so good handling it offset its lack of power, this just has too little power to offset. I mean, it does incredibly well for the speed. I mean, 95.5 miles an hour is nothing to shout about. That's easily 3 stars on that sign. But, it's not enough for the Rimac. It's 2.1 miles an hour off, and that's a decent amount on such a technical stage. What is a shame, because I like the Vol. It's actually pretty good to drive once you get used to it. And I had no issues with it other than acceleration. That's ultimately what did it in. Let's continue the open-top orange Roadster theme with the Lamborghini Cyan Roadster 808 hybrid-powered horsepower going to all 4 wheels in this brand spanking new Lamborghini. I had no idea what to think. I think it would either be brilliant or terrible. There was no in-between. Had a bit of a 2-wheel moment, but some vehicles could actually use that line to actually increase their average speed, if you could straight line it. It was a bit risky because it could bounce you out wide and throw you off the cliff, but if you got it right, it could work, and I did get it right with the Lamborghini. Unfortunately, it just doesn't have the grip. There wasn't really any particular area that it struggled at. It was a good car, I like how it drives, but it's just missing a little bit in every single category. The brakes could be a lot faster. It could be faster, accelerating could be lighter. If we had the normal, like the coupe version, it might be a bit faster because it should need less weight for the Roadster for chassis stiffening. But it still wouldn't beat it. 94.14 is good. Again, there's no real complaints about that. It's just not anywhere near quick enough for this challenge. It got completely outclassed. And yet, I thought this might still stand a chance because, well, it's a Viper ACR. One of the best handling cars America has ever made, and it's a beast. But again, it's only got 640 horsepower, it's only on road legal semi-slicks, and it only produces 2,000 pounds of downforce. So it's gonna be tough. You're gonna have to be really brave. That's why, again, went with the corner cut line to have absolute commitment, and it was up. It was just about holding on, but this is where the lack of power comes in, and it just can't accelerate fast enough. It fractionally beats out the Lamborghini by 0.02 of a mile an hour, but 94.16 is still, once again, miles off the Nevera. Disappointing, obviously, that the Viper ACR couldn't beat it. I love the ACR. Again, it's one of my all-time favorite handling vehicles, and it's got no wheel spin because it's naturally aspirated with super long gears, so it's got really good power delivery, and it's really good at carrying the speed, but acceleration just lacking. If it had 1,000 horsepower and the same ability to deploy as traction, then it would have done really well, might have even been in the Nevera. But it doesn't. So it doesn't. So what if we tried the European equivalent to a Viper ACR, the Porsche 911 GT3 RS, a previous generation? Now, Forza nerfed this car hard, I'm not gonna lie. In Horizon 4 it was S2 class. S2 class! And now it's S1 860. I don't know what they did to this car. It used to be one of the best handling cars in the game. I drove it all the time. It won so many of these challenges in terms of PI to performance ratios, to talk a better word. And in this, it's just bad. It doesn't have the acceleration, it never did, because it's only got 510, 513 horsepower. But it used to be able to handle better than anything else. And now it's just kind of meh. And I'm heartbroken, because I think it's a brilliant car. And now it's not. And I'm sad. Why, Forza? Why'd you do this to me? I love the GT3 RS. Please don't do this to the new one whenever you release it. Because inevitably the new GT3 RS will arrive in Horizon. And, please don't butcher it like you did the 991 RS. Because it's just sad, man. It's just sad. But I did have one last all-electric trick up my sleeve, the Cupra Urban Rebel concept. It's all-wheel drive, good amount of electric horsepower, and it's a race car concept thingy. So I thought maybe it'll do pretty well. No. It's got okay grip, not as much as I was hoping for with the racing tires and the crazy aero and everything and the lightweight nature of it. But it also does not have the acceleration. I mean, look at it. It's barely accelerating when compared to the Mach-E or especially the Nevera. I mean, 92 miles an hour average? Really disappointing from the Cupra. I was expecting a lot better. I know it's only 854 PI, but my God, that's not good. I was hoping for so much better from the Cupra, but it just doesn't have the acceleration, which is weird to say with an electric car, but it is not the worst handling vehicle of the day, and yet it was one of the slowest. Kind of opposite world, don't you think? We're sticking with the all-wheel drive race cars, though, with the Subaru WRX ARX Rallycross car, 600 horsepower all-wheel drive race car with lots of aerodynamics. Should be pretty darn good. However, it is on rally tires, which means I gotta get creative with my shortcuts. That's definitely a shortcut. I'm surprised that worked for a clean run. I'm also surprised Forza counts that as part of the racetrack for the speed zone. But if Forza counts it, I'm gonna count it, because this car needs all the help it can get. It does not have the grip, just because of the tires. The fact it gets 92.4 miles an hour on rally tires, essentially, is phenomenal, because it has no lateral G's with those tires. It's all downforce and acceleration. And the acceleration is very good because the gearing is very short and has 600 horsepower, so it is going to go pretty rapid, which does save it in the second half. So the second half makes up for the first half. It just doesn't make up enough. Personal side note, that's actually my favorite run of all of them, short of maybe the Huna truck, just because of the complete commitment jump over the dirt. Nearly drove it off a cliff. But credit to the suspension and the rallycross nature of it, it handled it like an absolute champ. Now, to be honest, it was at this point where I kind of started losing hope about actually being able to beat the Nevera, and this was more just for interest purposes. But there was one inkling of hope that I had, and that was the KTM Crossbow GT4, because this car is dumb. It is so absurdly grippy, it should be in a different game. And look at the speed. I mean, it carries as much speed as the Brabham through there in terms of average speed. I mean, that is an incredible 106 miles an hour through the triple apex corner. Absolutely phenomenal given the bumps and the dirt. Unfortunately, it has no acceleration on the X of the hairpin. It only has about 350 horsepower. And the crazy aero kit adds a lot of downforce, which is great for the first half. Not so great in the second half when we're accelerating like mad to the finish. So the KTM crossbow, despite being pretty low on the PI scale, I mean, it's only 845 here. So we're over 120 points lower than the Rimac. And it did a 95.6. That is a phenomenal speed for what horsepower and what PI rating it has. Again, it's one of those cars that if it had another 200 horsepower, it might win this challenge just by being so grippy. As it stands, though, it put up a valiant fight and a mighty effort, but it was just too little both horsepower and overall speed-wise. And our final car of the day is the lowest PI of the day, as you would expect. 808 PI for the Ford Fiesta RS WRC car. Again, not really much of a hope in this beating the Rimac, or even coming close. It has 375 horsepower and rally tires. What it does have is four-wheel drive, racing parts, and a very complex aero kit. So I thought, you know what, why not? And to be fair, for being on all of those things, the opening was fantastic. We were averaging 99 miles an hour into the hairpin, but then the same problem as the KTM came across. Well, the acceleration was much better. It just didn't have the power. 275 and all that aero, not even close. It was the slowest. It was the only car to be slower than the disappointing 911, so it did an 89.75. And, yeah, just did not have the power. I wish we had the Rally 1 cars, to be honest, the crazy ones with 500 horsepower, because they have the same handling as these cars, but 500 horsepower hybrids are significantly faster than 380 horsepower internal combustion cars. So, Forza, please add the R1 cars, please, and thank you. But as it stands, the Fiesta just way off the pace. And if we come to our table here, we will see that the Brabham BT62 was the fastest speed of the day, nearly 103 miles an hour through the speed zone, which is ludicrous, the cornering speed and the acceleration that vehicle had. But it's not the winner, because remember, we were not looking at a specific speed so long as it was higher than 97.6. We were looking at the lowest PI to beat 97.6, and that honor goes to the Huna truck. 896 PI, 98.02 miles an hour. Not only does it beat the Rimac Nevera by 0.38 miles an hour, it beats the Senna. It beats multiple multi-million-dollar hypercars, the Venom, the Nevera, the Senna. It's nearly as fast as a GT3 car. It's an incredible feat for what is, remember, a drift vehicle. It was built for Gymkhana 10. It's a Gymkhana truck. And it was nearly as fast as a GT3 car. I mean, hell, the Hoonigan RS200 was faster than the Mosler. In fact, it was the fastest of the non-crazy race cars, like the Ferrari and the Bugatti and the Sierra. And then there are the vehicles that didn't quite beat the Nevera, but still put up a very impressive showing. The Viper ACR and the KTM Crossbow come to mind. The KTM nearly beat a Hennessy Venom. It was only 1 mile an hour slower, despite having 6 times less power. That's an incredible feat, even though it didn't beat the Nevera. To be honest, the only vehicle I'm surprised by / disappointed with is the Cupra Urban Rebel and the Porsche 911. The GT3 RS deserves way better than what it has in this game right now. And both the Cupra and the Mach-E 1400 were all-electric race cars that should have performed above what they actually did. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because our winner is a drift car. And that is the most amazing thing I've seen all day. But that will be it for this episode of Forza Horizon 5. I'll be back with more.